Hey there, guys. This is Cole. Welcome back to another movie review. Today, we are continuing on the Evil Dead series of movie reviews, and today's movie I'm going to review is Evil Dead 2, or as it's also called, Evil Dead 2 Dead by Dawn from 1987. Now, I absolutely love this movie. This is easily my favorite of the series and one of my favorite horror movies of all time, but, yeah, so anyways, if you guys saw my review with the first movie, you would know that I liked the first one, but I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of the ending, but overall I did like the first one, but this one on the other hand, I do prefer to the first one. But anyways, so what is the plot to the 1987 horror movie Evil Dead 2? Well, the plot of the movie is as follows. The second of three films in the Evil Dead series is part horror and part comedy, with Ash Williams, played by Bruce Campbell, once again battling horrifying demons at a secluded cabin in the woods. After discovering an audio tape left by a college professor that contains voices reading from the Necronomicon, aka the Book of the Dead, Ash's girlfriend Linda becomes possessed by evil spirits that are awakened by the voices on the tape. Ash soon realizes that there is no escape. So that's basically the plot synopsis to Evil Dead 2, but so how was this movie made? Well, because Evil Dead was a big hit, when it comes to the very first movie, The Evil Dead, it was a very well-received movie by both critics and audiences when it released in 1981, and it was the very first movie Sam Raimi directed, and the popularity of that movie pretty much put Sam Raimi on the map. And then in 1985, Sam Raimi did a movie called Crime Wave, which did not do that great, and many people didn't like that, and that was a bomb, so because Crime Wave did not do well, Sam Raimi decided that he was going to go back to Evil Dead, which is what put him on the map as a director in the first place. So he began work on a sequel, and so how was this movie received? Well, when Evil Dead 2 Dead by Dawn was released on March 13th, 1987 in the USA, it received positive reviews from critics and audiences. It was successful at the box office, making $6 million worldwide on a $3.5 million budget. The movie was praised for its blend of horror and comedy. And like I said, when this movie came out, Evil Dead 2 was a very well-received movie by both critics and audiences. But as for my reaction of the movie, yeah, Evil Dead 2 is a great sequel, and it's easily the best movie in this series, and probably always will be. And I'm gonna say this is my favorite movie directed by Sam. This is I don't know, to be honest, I often go back and forth with what my favorite movie directed by Sam Raimi is. It's either a tie between this movie or Spider-Man 2 from 2004. I think that both of those sequels are phenomenal, and those two movies are easily the two best movies that Sam Raimi has directed. But yeah, absolutely love this movie. So without further ado, let's get into my review. And there will be spoilers, but I mean, come on, most people have seen this movie by now, and this movie is gonna be 40 in 2 years from now. So yeah. The movie starts off where there's narration at the beginning, and the movie's narrator says, "Legend has it that it was written by the Dark Ones, Necronomicon Ex Mortes, roughly translated, Book of the Dead. The book served as a passageway to the evil worlds beyond. It was written long ago. When the seas ran red with blood, it was this blood that was used to ink the book. In the year 1300 AD, the book disappeared." And I will say, that is a very cool intro and backstory to the Book of the Dead. So it's basically just giving a little recap of the first movie. We then cut to our main characters, Ash Williams, played by Bruce Campbell, and his girlfriend, Linda, who this time is played by a different actress, but, they had to change a couple things for this movie, which I'll explain why, but Anyways, like I said, we then cut to our two main characters, Ash Williams and his girlfriend Linda, who are in the car traveling on a road to the woods with Ash Williams driving the car. And they're on their way to the secluded cabin in the woods on a mountaintop. And Ash and his girlfriend Linda arrive and are having fun in the cabin at night. Linda tells Ash she loves necklace. She loves the necklace, and then Linda says, "I feel funny about being here. What if those people who own this place come back?" And then Ash says they're not going to come back. And even if they do, we'll tell them the car broke down or something like that. And then Linda then laughs and says, with your car, they would believe it. Ash Williams then says, "Hey, what do you say we have some champagne? Hey, baby. And then, Linda agrees to it. And now, I will say this. One aspect I really like about this movie and why I prefer it to the first movie is the character development. Now, do not get me wrong, Ash Williams, played by Bruce Campbell, was a good character in the first movie, but he did feel a little underdeveloped compared to this one and the next one. Here in this movie, though, Ash Williams is developed better as a character, and you get more of his personality in this movie, which is why I prefer it to the first one. And I mean, do not get me wrong, he was a good character in the first one, but he did kind of feel a little underdeveloped. But the reason I really like this movie is because it takes a character who I liked good enough, but turns him into a phenomenal movie character. But then, anyways, getting back to the review, Ash Williams finds a tape recorder and he plays the tape recorder. And the tape recorder says these exact words. "This is Professor Raymond Nobi, Department of Ancient History, log entry number 2. I believe I have made a significant discovery, significant find in the castle of Kandar, having journeyed there with my wife, Hentria, my daughter Annie, and my associate, Professor Ed Gently. It was in the rear chamber of the castle, and we stumbled upon something remarkable. Natram Damanto, the Book of the Dead. My wife and I brought this book to this cabin where I could study it, undisturbed. It was here that I began the translations. The book speaks of a spiritual presence, a thing of evil that roams the forest and dark bowers of a man's domain. It is through this recitation of the book's passages that this dark spirit is given license to possess the living. Included here are the phonetic pronunciations of those passages. Kanda et Terra Amantos. And while this is going on, the unseen evil force is going towards the cabin, and we see this in the unseen evil force's point of view. Then it goes to the cabin and destroys a glass window in the bedroom Linda is in, and then Linda screams. And again, we don't see the enemy on screen, but we see Linda scream, and obviously this causes Ash Williams to stop the tape recorder and investigate the noise. And then he sees that Linda is gone from the bedroom. He then goes outside to see his girlfriend Linda possessed by a demon, and Linda is trying to, attack him, but Ash is able to defeat her by, cutting off the head with a shovel, and then he buries Linda. And then the unseen evil force pushes Ash in the air, far into the forest, and he hits a tree, and then he falls into a puddle, and then Ash gets out, and we briefly see Ash Williams possessed by a demon. Then he stares into the sun with his eyes, which removes the demon from his body. Then Ash passes out. He then wakes up later and sees a large ghostly face at the cabin, and this face at the cabin basically says, "Join us," reciting that line from the first movie. Ash is driving his car to escape the cabin, but he sees the bridge is destroyed, so he's basically trapped. So he basically has to fight off this evil force. And then not long after that, Ash Williams, played by Bruce Campbell, he gets into his car and is driving it as fast as he can to escape the evil force chasing him, but he flies out the car window, as the window shatters. Then Ash runs back to the cabin with the evil force still chasing him, and then it goes away, leaving Ash alone just for a little bit. And then so Ash Williams then walks into a room to see the piano playing by itself, which I did like that bit of the movie. Also, another thing I forgot to mention, remember how I said I was going to mention why some events in this movie were it is just small minor things here and there, but now some people might wonder, well, why did this movie retcon some of the first movie? Well, so here's why. The reason this movie retconned the first movie is because director Sam Raimi and his team did not have the rights to use footage from the original film. So they had to reshoot a condensed version of the beginning to serve as a recap and setup for the sequel. This production necessity meant they had to restart the story with only Ash and his girlfriend Linda as a way to streamline the plot and reduce costs. So I just wanted to point that out there as a fun little fact of trivia. But honestly, I think that retcon works. Now, normally for me, I usually hate when movie franchises do retcons, but I think for this movie, this is probably one of the only few times it actually worked. But anyways, let's get back to the review. Linda, who is possessed by a demon, puts her head back on and is out the grave, out for revenge on Ash Williams. And then Ash Williams is watching Linda give a bizarre dance as she laughs, which I will admit is a good bit of dark humor. Then Linda, possessed by the demon, says, "Dance with me," and then she grabs Ash Williams' head through the broken up boarded window, and then Linda's head falls off laughing, making Ash scream in horror. Then the head lands on top of Ash's lap and says, "Hello, lover," and then bites Ash on the hand, which I thought was a good bit of dark humor. And then Ash is trying to do everything he can to get the head off his hand, biting him. Like, he tries slamming it with a book, he tries slamming it into a wall, and nothing's just working. And then, not long after that, Ash gets the head off his hand, and he goes to the work shed, and he puts Linda's head in like a hand-reel metal crushing machine, but like he doesn't crush her head, but he puts it in between there, and then Linda's head says, "Even now, you have your darling Linda's soul. She suffers in torment." Ash then says, "You're going down," and so Ash Williams, he notices that the chainsaw is gone. As soon as this happens, Linda's body holding the chainsaw is chasing Ash, so then Ash decides to defend himself by taking a crowbar, hitting the chainsaw blade, which makes it bounce back and is starting to cut the top part neck of Linda's body. And then the body falls to the ground. And then Linda's head, who does not look possessed anymore, says, she basically says, "Please don't hurt me. You swore we would always be together. I love you." But then Ash yells no. Then we see Linda is still possessed by the demon with the white eyes, and she yells, "Yes, your love was a lie," and now she burns in hell. And then Ash is obviously enraged by this. He uses the chainsaw to saw the head apart, and then Ash leaves the shed, trying to have some time to himself, but Ash is still trying to get prepared, so he basically is inside, loading a shotgun. He then hears moaning and sees a chair moving by itself. However, Ash Williams does not feel right. He sees his own reflection in the mirror, and his reflection from the mirror grabs him and says, and he says, "Are you okay?" He says, "I don't think so. We just cut up our girlfriend with a chainsaw. Does that sound fine?" Then the reflection maniacally laughs, choking Ash with its hand. Then the chuckling stops and the reflection is gone. And then so Ash Williams then sees weird veins in his hand, and his hand starts to attack him as the demons possess his hand. And Ash pleads for the demon to give him his hand back. So the demons who possessed Ash's hand make him smash plates on his head, knocking him out, but the hand is still active. Then Ash wakes up and he stabs his hand, being controlled. He basically pins his hand on the ground with a screwdriver, and then Ash Williams proceeds to cut off his hand with a chainsaw, and he wraps it up with a bandage to stop the bleeding. I love the whole part, I love the whole part when the hand gets stuck in the mousetrap, escapes, and then the demon controlling the hand flips off Ash Williams. Like, I thought that scene was absolutely hilarious. Eventually, Ash Williams does manage to blow up the hand. Then a large amount of blood sprays all over Ash's face, then sucks itself back into the wall, which I thought was a nice visual moment. Then Ash Williams comes across a deer head mounted on the wall, which is laughing at him, possessed by a demon, as well as other objects around him. Then Ash laughs back at them. Like, that scene was a pretty good, funny bit of dark humor. Then Ash Williams fires his gun, making the room go silent. And so Annie shows up to the cabin with Scott, with her boyfriend Scott, and she sees the chainsaw with blood on the floor. And I mean, obviously Ash is innocent, but Annie doesn't know that. Annie thinks that Ash was the one responsible for the death of her parents. So then Scott and Ed throw Ash down the cellar door, and Annie says, "I hope you rot down there," and spits on him. Then they close the door. Then Annie decides to play the tape recorder and realizes it's her father's voice. And the tape recorder is basically giving the story about the Book of the Dead and that he had no choice but to dismember the person, which was Annie's mom, possessed by a demon. And then Ash is in the cellar. He sees a person possessed by the demon, and then he screams, also known as a deadite. And so basically, Annie and basically says, somebody's down here with them. And then the possessed person, which is Annie's dad, basically says, there is something in my fruit cellar. And then Ash is yelling, screaming, let me out, there's something down here. The demon says, I'll swallow your soul. And then Ash is dragged out the cellar. Then the demon bites Ash's foot. Then the demon attacks Bobby Joe. Ash Williams jumps on the cellar door, which causes the deadite's eye to pop out of the head and then fly into Annie's mouth as Annie is screaming. But the way it was done, it was a good blend of horror and comedy. Ash and Bobby manage to close the cellar door. When it is silent in the cabin, Ash says, there's something out there. And then Ash says, there's something out there. That witch in the cellar is only part of it. He lives out in those woods. In the dark, something that has come back from the dead. Then a woman who looks normal, who appears as Annie's mother, says, it's me, dear, but Ash tells Annie not to fall for it. Annie then says, that's not my mother. Then Scott, possessed by the demon, is floating in the air, and he says, we are the things that shall be again. And then Scott, aka the demon's voice, says, we want what is yours, life, dead by dawn. Ash Williams then uses an axe to defeat Scott, who is a demon, who is a demonic possessed being. And then Bobby says, the trail we came on, it just ain't there no more. And then Ash Williams and everyone else must survive until the next morning by dawn. Ash Williams and Ash Williams, and then of course there's the whole part where Bobby is aiming a gun at there's a part where Jake is pointing the gun at Ash Williams, and he says, I'm running the show now. And then Ash tells him it's a bad idea, but Jake won't listen, and he says, we're going to go out there and find Bobby. And as a result, Ash becomes possessed by a demon, attacking Jake, and says to Annie, join us. And then Jake ends up dead, and Ash, who is still possessed, knocks out Annie, but finds Linda's necklace, and he screams, crying in agony, and is no longer possessed by a demon. Annie tries to attack him, but stops when Ash Williams convinces Annie he's normal now. Then, at the 1 minute, 7 second mark of the movie, which is the part we've all been waiting for, Ash Williams replaces his hand with a shotgun, with a chainsaw, and he has a shotgun in the other hand. And of course, this is the most well-known iconic quote of the movie where he says, groovy, which is the most well-known iconic quote of the movie. And that line delivery was great due to the great performance by Bruce Campbell as the lead character, Ash Williams. Ash then cuts the cellar door open to get the pages that Jake threw down. So Ash comes up from the cellar and attacks Annie's father, who was possessed by a demon, aka a Deadite. And one thing I will say about this movie, I really like the practical effects and stop motion in the movie. Like, the effects still hold up very well 38 years later. And so Ash is able to defeat the Deadite. You know, I love the part when the head of the Deadite says, "I will swallow your soul." And then, of course, there's the whole iconic scene where Ash Williams, played by Bruce Campbell, says, "Swallow this," and he blows off the Deadite's head. I thought that was a rather good scene. Ash Williams then hugs Annie, who was crying at the death of her father, reasonably so. But then, evil possessed trees are surrounding the house, and Ash and Annie must survive. Ash basically says, "Finish the passages, get rid of it." And a large tree hand grabs Ash, and a demon's head is about to eat Ash, but Annie finishes the chant, but Annie dies as a hand stabbed her in the back with a sword. And so Ash is obviously enraged by this, so he defeats the demon with his chainsaw, and the door to the house now opens up. But then now this is the end of the movie. So the movie ends where Ash is teleported through a portal back in times to the medieval ages, which obviously sets up the third movie, Army of Darkness, which is a great movie I'll be reviewing next. So yeah, at the end of the day, Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, or Evil Dead 2 is a great horror sequel. If I were to do a list of my top 10 favorite horror movies, this would easily be on there. And I'm going to give Evil Dead 2 a full-blown 10 out of 10. So yeah. Anyways, guys, that was my review for Evil Dead 2. And next up, I'll be covering Army of Darkness later.